For any potential newcomers or people who just didn't watch it, this is an extension of my tier list video where I go through and explain the reasons behind the grading for each piece of media in the list. After having made my tier list for the Persona series a while back, I figured I'd elaborate on it as well like my other lists from that video, just so the library is complete. Initially I thought of making one for Persona alongside the others at the time I made those, but opted against it as I found it difficult to rank some over others. But now that some time has passed, I can finally cover them. Now, if you're not familiar with the channel or simply don't keep up with my videos and community posts, I'll reiterate here that these lists are not exclusively about story, writing, or characters, nor is it at all about gameplay for this list in particular. This is instead primarily about something I define as artistry, which is explained here, among some secondary things that are also significant to me. Simply put, this is primarily about how I personally feel towards the artistry or style of each game, how much it resonates with me. S means I love it, A means I like it, B means it's not bad, C means it's decent but could be better, and D means it's just not it for me, while a plus means it's halfway to the next grade. Once again, I should clarify that D does not mean I hate whatever is in that category. It simply just means it's not my cup of tea. It either had nothing that stood with me, or whatever did was overshadowed by everything else. Let it be said that I am not someone who gets angry or hateful towards things like movies and games, and that this is merely just me casually expressing my own feelings. It is not in any way meant to be presented as fact. Lastly, forgive me if I sound like I'm nitpicking in some areas or not much is said. These explanations are not full rundowns, but just some things that I can cite about them off the top of my head as I try my best to detail them. Sometimes I also simply just don't have much to say. And now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. Beginning with S is Persona 1 and 2. Now, something else that should be known is that, as with other series, I am not necessarily a true fan. As in, I don't get involved in fandoms, and that I just enjoy things both on my own and in my own way. I'm also not a veteran. I was introduced to Persona somewhere in early 2018, with 5 being my first exposure to the series. For a while I was unfamiliar with the other games, especially 1 and 2, as I had only focused on 5 and was really invested in that for a while. It wasn't until sometime later that I took a look into the previous games that my perspective on the series changed, particularly once I got into 1 and 2, which were the ones I looked at last. Once I familiarized myself with those two, I found myself hit with a feeling that I did not experience with the other games. The thing that stood out to me about these games was just how, I guess you could say, deep and down to earth they were. Not in terms of the events that take place or the subject matter as I mentioned earlier, but they just had a very supernatural / paranormal, mysterious, philosophical, and even classical ambience to them. From the title screens, the openings, the cinematics, the designs, the covers, and most importantly, the music. Even from a writing aspect, they just felt very profound with deeper messages. And besides all of that, in general, they also had just a, as some have described it, grungier aesthetic to them. By and large, it all really spoke to me emotionally. It changed my perspective on the Persona series as a whole, and how I both view and feel towards each game onward. That leads me into the original Persona 3, which I give an A+. Now, I've heard a lot of people who favor 1 and 2 say that 3 is the start of what they call Neo-Persona, but I actually am quite moved by it in much the same way as 1 and 2, albeit not exactly on the same level. It's true that the game is a little more anime, as they say. Not in terms of the design, as obviously they're all anime, but in that it does bring in more of those stereotypical tropes that you usually see in most mainstream anime. Not to mention just some of the songs, and of course the game having a little more added flair than its predecessors. However, not only is it minor, but the style is done in a way that I feel doesn't conflict with the ambience of before. Like, the overall atmosphere is still very synonymous with what was presented in 1 and 2, while still being something new, and quite frankly beautiful. It's like how the 90s and 2000s are sort of sister eras. It's still got some of that grunge, but with a 2000s edge. I love the music and the shots, the colors, the sounds, the covers. It all still gives off a very down-to-earth, deep, mysterious, and poetic atmosphere that once again really speaks to me on an emotional level. Simply put, it's different, but it's beautiful just the same. Not only that, although not entirely related, it's also the last game to actually tie into 1 and 2 in a significant way. From Mitsuru's dad mentioning the Nanjo group, to Philemon still having a bearing on the story. In all, I would say 2 and 3 are my favorite games in the series. Next in B tier is Persona 4. Now, admittedly, after looking back at 1 to 3, my feelings towards 4 have slightly declined. However, I still feel 4 is relatively synonymous with its predecessors. There are things about it that resonate with me as much as 3, and I'd say it still continues the identity that the others set to a fair degree. The only thing about it is how it falls deeper into the minor things that I listed about Persona 3. It has nothing to do with the game trying to take on a lighter tone, which is a separate aspect that I don't mind at all. It's not like 1 to 3 didn't have their fun moments.
Why don't you come on over?
It's just that it does so under a style that doesn't impact me as emotionally as the rest. Like, it feels much more anime than the others, in a way that I feel begins to sort of diminish what made the previous 3 so beautiful for me, especially Golden. A noticeable difference becomes apparent when you compare certain things from the openings to most of the music and so forth. But for the most part, I still find a fair bit of resonance with it and have no major reservations. It's a more moderate change, but nothing super significant. C tier consists of the Persona 4 Arena duology, Persona Q, Persona 4 Dancing, and Persona 5. To be honest, this column is sort of inconclusive, as I mostly ranked all except 5 off of memory and haven't looked at them recently, so they may actually be subject to change. However, for now I'll say that they all begin to fall more into a new identity that really deviates away from what I personally loved about the first 3 games, especially once you get to Persona 5. All of what I loved about the first 3 are pretty much reduced to mere traces that are overshadowed by other things. The games by this time come to a point where they put more emphasis on being stylish, cute, fun, and colorful, rather than what was once more supernatural and mysterious. Before, they managed to continue the 90s direction to varying degrees, in a way that was still very substantial to me. But with these games, while there are still bits and pieces sprinkled throughout, that direction is borderline abandoned. It's the start of a new age of Persona. Finally, that leaves us with D tier, which pretty much consists of the rest of the games such as Persona 3 Dancing, Persona 5 Dancing, Persona Q2, Strikers, and Tactica. The grading should be no surprise by now. It's at this point that there's no trace of the previous direction left, and it's been completely abandoned. What was once merely transformed has now been changed completely. The games have gone from this to this.
Again to feel the jazz of the beautiful ballet. How about thunder? Oh, maybe some rock and roll.
Ever since 2012, it's pretty much become more and more equivalent to a standard mainstream anime. Fan service, the same comedic jokes, animal mascot characters, flashy costumes, chibi designs, and lots of extravagant visual flair. Like I said, ever since getting into 1 and 2, my perspective on the series changed. I feel like Persona in the beginning introduced itself as a series that was meant to be deeper and less stereotypical. They were games of high artistic value, albeit with some moments of fun. Even though I started with 5 and was genuinely into the modern games for a while, that's the stylistic direction I became a fan of, as it just happened to hit me more as an outsider. So while I hold no objections with any of the modern games and still hold a place with them independently, it's when I compare them to the predecessors that I feel largely apathetic with them. And well, there you have it. If anyone has any similar feelings, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Until then, I appreciate those who are willing to listen.